I'll invite Leanne, our CEO at Feel Good. Leanne, do you want to kick off the session for us today?
Thanks so much, Jill. Good afternoon and a warm welcome. My name's Leanne Rigby and I'm the CEO and founder here at Feel Good. Thank you all so much for taking the time out to join us today for our last event of 2022. We're extremely honoured to have three incredible guests from Deloitte, City Mental Health Alliance and The Body Shop. And I've had the pleasure of getting to know Alison, Tim and Nathan over the last few months, and they are super lovely people. And I'm truly in awe of the fantastic work that each of you are doing to really disrupt and move forward the mental health agenda. Today gives us the opportunity to share and learn from each other on best practice to tackle mental health stigma, but also to celebrate the incredible strides being taken to create healthy workplaces. Mental health is something that we all have. It fluctuates, which is completely normal. However, because of stigma, this is leading to people just not being able to seek the support when they need it, which has negative consequences for all of us, our family and friends, and the organizations that we work for. So for those of you who don't know us, we are Feel Good, a boutique global wellbeing and mental health consultancy who are truly passionate about creating a positive change. And our USP is that we're constantly innovating to bring fresh ideas that will have the greatest impact for organizational culture. Our new Brilliant Minds mental health training program is leading the way with a practice-led approach that supports leaders with the skills to confidently lead that conversation so that we can break down that stigma and drive the change that we all need to see. We'd love the chance to talk to you about how we're breaking ground with Brilliant Minds through our multimodal delivery method, which is having great impact and engagement, which is all about cutting through that noise and getting to the people that need us most. After the session, we have a report, which is Take Action, Ending Stigma Around Mental Health, and we will send that to everyone once the session's done today. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Jill Williams, organizational psychologist, who's going to be hosting the session. Thank you all.
Fantastic. Thank you, Leanne, for the introduction and welcome everyone. It's great to see so many familiar names here yet again. It's wonderful that as a community, we can come back together at least every quarter to talk about the topics that matter most to all of you and your organizations. So as Leanne says, today we're going to focus on this idea of stigma related to mental health in the workplace. So if we consider what stigma actually is, that devaluing, discrediting or shaming of someone because of a characteristic, this happening with mental health isn't anything new. You know, it's been around since the dark ages when people were believed to be possessed. And I'm very thankful we've come very far in our beliefs as societies beyond that. However, what we know is that it still does exist and it's coming through in organizations quite strongly. You know, we see in our clients that stigma is alive and well in many ways. And what's happening is that's leading to increased levels of presenteeism or absenteeism at work. It's also meaning that for a lot of you who I know are HR professionals and wellbeing professionals, you're investing a lot in your wellbeing strategies. You're offering a lot of support and resource to help your employees support their own mental health. But not always are people accessing this or they're using it. And that's coming from an existing stigma as well. Perhaps it's exactly what they need, but they don't necessarily want to reach out, get help and access those organizational resources because of fears, because of the feeling of actually, is there still some shame associated with saying, hey, I'm burnt out, or actually I'm going through a period of depression, or whatever it might be. So we know that stigma is still in existence today. You know, there's some aspects of the hustle culture of recent decades that has, you know, really reinforced this idea that we need to be resilient and always on and power through things has actually not helped us move forward. But the great news is there's been so much that has helped us move forward. And whilst we still see stigma across all industries, it's much less than it was 3 years ago, 5 years ago, and definitely 10 years ago. So we as a community really deserve to come and celebrate this. And I'm absolutely delighted today that that's what we're going to do. We're going to be learning from some of the best in the industry about what they've done to really reduce the stigma in their organizations. I've got some questions up my sleeve for them, and I'm sure that you do as well. So throughout the session, please keep your questions coming in the Q&A box or in the chat. We'll answer some as we go, and we'll make sure there's time towards the end of the conversation to really dive into those. No question is off the table, so please do share that with us, Q&A or chat. Feel free to share with each other. We're here to celebrate, to learn from each other in this community. So also share in the chat all the things you've been doing as we explore this conversation to help reduce stigma in your organizations. And we'll be sharing some links and resources as we go throughout today, things we think might be helpful and might enhance some of the conversation we're having. So keep your eyes on the chat for those as well. But without further ado, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome my panel, people who I've had the pleasure of having multiple conversations about this topic, this really important topic in recent weeks. And I know you're going to get a lot from this conversation too. So firstly, I am delighted to welcome Nathan Andres from The Body Shop. Nathan, would you like to share a little bit about your background and why you're here today?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Nate. Call me Nate Andres. I'm from The Body Shop, and my role is quite interesting. It's across Asia Pacific, so I'm calling in from Singapore, where I'm based, and I oversee all of the company markets and influence across our franchise markets here in Asia, which is about 22 different markets. And I wear two hats. I am the director of human resources, but also the global well-being leader across the entire business and enterprise for the Body Shop. I'm here because we're blowing up taboo topics at the Body Shop as we are activists in this space. And I'm happy just to share with all of you some of the things that we do and how we do it. It's a pure delight to work with Feel Good and the esteemed colleagues on this panel. We were laughing. We might have to like call it quits at the end. But I'm so happy to be here and to be with these beautiful people, because together we can make a massive change. So that's a little bit about me.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nate, and great to have you here. You know, we're really leading the way as an activist, so I can't wait to dive into the conversation. Fantastic. Thank you. I'm also delighted that we're welcoming Tim Ackroyd, who is leading on Deloitte's global mental health strategies. So Tim, would love to hear a little bit about, why you're here today as well.
Thanks, Jill. Hi, everyone. Yes, my name's Tim Ackroyd. So I'm a global talent senior manager here at Deloitte. And for the last couple of years, I've been responsible for the design and execution of our global mental health strategy, which was only started a couple of years ago. And I'm looking forward to sharing a bit about that. My background is predominantly organizational and health psychology. So I started my career in behavioral research, worked for various universities and government agencies over in Australia, where I was investigating interventions to better support comorbid depression and cancer. But then I moved into Deloitte about 15 years ago. And I was moved to the UK, where I was head of wellbeing and engagement there before moving into this role in 2020. And now essentially I work with and advise talent leaders across Deloitte. So that's across 165 countries to support people's mental health, essentially, in ways and strategies to do that. A great privilege, such a challenging and exciting role. I feel like I've learned more in the last couple of years than I feel like I've learned across my whole career, actually, just looking at mental health in different contexts. And today I'm looking forward to just sharing a bit about some of the learnings we've made and what we've implemented and what we've done. So hopefully, hearing from others on the panel as well. So there's plenty to share, plenty to learn.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tim. And we look forward to hearing about what's really on your mind today as we go throughout this conversation. And last but absolutely no means least, we are so honoured to have Alison Unstead from the City Mental Health Alliance with us today. And Alison's work that she does in the city is just so inspiring to us at Feel Good. So Alison, we'd love to hear a little bit about your background and why you're here today.
Thank you, Jill. And absolute pleasure. Really looking forward to the conversation. So I'm the CEO of the City Mental Health Alliance. And for those of you who are not familiar with us, we're a membership organisation. We've just recently celebrated our 10-year anniversary. And essentially, we were set up in the City of London originally in the aftermath of the financial crisis and the kind of recognition of a number of businesses that individuals' mental health was being impacted. by the financial crisis, but more importantly, nobody was talking about it. And I'm pleased to say, working with a wonderful range of businesses, we've seen a lot change in the last 10 years. And we now work with all organisations in terms of helping them to kind of embed, create and evolve their mental health workplace practices. And we do that through things such as, events, creating resources, and most importantly, through our annual assessment process. My background, I am an inclusion and wellbeing specialist. Before joining the City Mental Health Alliance, I worked with a number of large organisations, helping them to develop their global inclusion and wellbeing strategies. So I hope I can certainly share a lot from the City Mental Health Alliance and hopefully from my previous experience.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alison. Great to have you here as well. And I think, you touched upon the change that's been seen in the last decade, and that is absolutely what we want to explore today. How much progress have we made? Quite a lot. So let's really think about, the practical things that everyone can be doing to support that. Just one more practical housekeeping thing before we go ahead. Thank you for letting me know the chat appears to be disabled. We're clearly having a tech day, one of those tech days that everyone has at some point. So the Feel Good team will be trying to get that activated. So hopefully we will have the chat up and running shortly. So Sophia, thank you for trying to resolve that for us. In the meantime, share your questions and also use the Q&A box for just any reflections and chat, and I will share those as we go throughout the conversation. So thanks for bearing with us as we get that up and running. All right, so we want to think about this idea of mental health stigma and how it's currently manifesting in organizations. What does it look like in this post-pandemic hybrid world that we're living in? Because as Alison says, we've made great leaps in that in the last decade. So what I'm keen to hear to sort of start off our conversation is, what all of you as panelists have seen around mental health stigma, how it's evolved globally, kind of what's been driving those changes. So Tim, I'd love to come to you first and hear your reflections on this.
Yeah, absolutely. At risk of stating the obvious here, I think the context in which organisations operate has dramatically shifted over the past few years, and that's sort of stuff we've already sort of mentioned. But when you think about the pandemic, the state of the global economy, climate anxiety, political unrest, there have been some widespread, highly impactful challenges and global threats on people of all generations and all levels of organisations. And these challenges really haven't discriminated. So most of all, it's, I think we can say that most, if not all of us, have directly or indirectly experienced some form of poor mental health. And this has really shed a light on the global mental health crisis that I would argue existed before the pandemic started, and this was certainly something sort of top of mind for many. And don't just believe me on this, I think there's a lot of good data to back this up. Consider the Deloitte Gen Z and Millennials survey. So this is a survey we go to tens of thousands of Gen Zs and Millennials across the globe outside of Deloitte, asking poignant questions about their experience. And what was really clear is that high levels of stress and anxiety are persisting. So 46% of Gen Zs are stressed all or most of the time, and 38% of Millennials. I mean, that's a huge proportion. And what's more is that another 46% of Gen Zs are feeling burnt out simply by the intensity of their workload. But the good news is that, certainly as we were saying, Jill, earlier, like there's a lot that's been done, and actually, the Millennials and Gen Zs are saying that, 57% of Gen Zs, again, 53% of Millennials agreeing that employer has increased the focus on mental health and well-being, which is great. I think though that the challenge though here, and this is the poignant stats, is that, experiencing meaningful positive change has not yet been experienced by these generations in the workplace, and the stigma still remains. So 53% of Gen Zs saying that although their employer talks about it more, they're not feeling the meaningful impact on them. 33% of Millennials are saying that they don't feel comfortable talking to their leaders about their mental health. And half of people who are taking time off work due to poor mental health are giving their employer a different reason. So yes, I think, basically say the mental health conversation is finally very public, very universal. We've definitely talking about it more. And unfortunately, it's organizations that are experiencing that fallout. They need to do something about this, because they're the ones that are, I suppose, feeling it in their organizations and the impact on business. But we do need to do more. And, so in summary, I'd say, globally, this is a big conversation. Locally, that context is different. But really, we need to pick up doing more and having more impact for our people if we're going to see some change here.
Absolutely. It's almost as though this cocktail of external events, has really created those quite incredible statistics about, how many people were feeling stressed most or all of the time. 46% of Gen Z. That is phenomenally high. And I think, that's where I'm really taking what you're saying, Tim, in terms of we need to do more. We've done a lot, we're making progress, but we are at a very unique point in time. And this is about how do we all really listen to what that data is saying and think about how do we move further, faster together.
And also, Joe, I'll just quickly add that, for us at Deloitte, that millennial generation, Gen Z, is 80% of our workforce now. So, this is the generation that are working. So take that 46%, that's a really worrying statistic for many businesses and organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one that definitely sort of really reminds us, why we're focused on this. And I'm sure for some organizations will be a bit of a wake up to this being a strategic imperative for very much those reasons you're describing, Tim. Absolutely. Nate, how about you? How have you seen this on a global perspective with the global role you do?
Well, thanks. And I agree with Tim that the statistics are alarming, that we still have lots of work to do. I think, one of the things as I have been speaking in the region here in Asia Pacific, my region is pretty wide and vast, and I have a fairly large breadth of audience across the world. One of the things that we keep hearing about is, we're not going backwards. We're not going back to pre-pandemic, pre-COVID days. And we're not yet quite on the other side of it either. And so we're in this period called the interim normal. And so as we're in this interim normal before we get to the new normal, whatever that might look like, and it might take a while, I think the journey of mental health and stigma around that has rapidly moved through the funnel. And as we sit here in this interim normal, it's becoming more normal in my business, in retail, and particularly in this part of the world, in the region, for us to start to have conversations in the space. So that's a good sign. It's a sign that progress is being made, and rapidly. I think we can look to COVID and the pandemic as the accelerator that just opened up the opportunities for us to be speaking in this space. I think that when we look at retail, our teams specifically around the region and around the world, they were the front line dealing with our customers and people in malls and on high street shopping, when we were still dealing with PPEs and limited trading hours. And so there's a heavy burden that I think they've had to wear. I think what we're going to see, not only with frontline workers and people who, certainly healthcare workers and people, I think there's still going to be this trauma that we are not talking about yet, but is going to show up in our bodies later. You think, God, do you remember COVID? We did a lot of really heavy lifting. It was hard. And I think people are going to come through out of this interim normal into the new normal and look back and say, oh, yeah, we need to still sort out some of the things that we've been dealing with. And I'll talk a little bit about how we do that at the Body Shop. We've been kind of driving the opportunity to talk about mental health, specifically in the well-being work. It's our number one and number two priority and initiative is to destigmatize mental health. And, I think I said the other day, and I hope we can normalize this, if someone breaks their arm, and they come back to the office and they're wearing a cast, or, they're holding their mouth because they've had a dental surgery, physically that there's an ailment there. What we need to be doing is being super open about discussing therapy and discussing psychoanalysis and talking about, I went to my doctor today and it was the mental health doctor, or I went to see a well-being counselor. We need to throw the doors open. I talk a lot about this in the book I wrote, no matter the closet, open the door. And, we need to start opening the doors to these types of conversations.
Absolutely. Oh, I completely agree with you. You know, as we open the door and as we make it safe for people to step through that door, that's where we're going to be able to create this space where we can heal from the trauma, both individually, but collectively and as organizations that we've faced in recent years. And sort of think we might not even be at the tip of the iceberg yet in terms of what we're seeing, to your point, just so much trauma that we're all still holding on to that is going to have to be processed in coming years. And we might not traditionally think of the workplace as a place for that, but actually given how central work is to our lives, it's going to be a place for that. Absolutely. And I think, you know, there's a lot in what you're saying there, Nate, that is around, you know, difference as well, and recognizing different industries are going to be at different places with this and have different experiences. I do a lot of work with retailers as well, and I was having a chat with a client last week about quality of life in retail and how actually the things that are being put in place in headquarters, in retail, in manufacturing sites, in contact centers, they can't be to give people the same flexibility. It's a different way of working. So how do we make sure there's equity in how we're approaching mental health in those spaces? And then the same in terms of, you know, where are we globally? Lots of differences across that. And Alison, I'd love to bring you into the conversation at this point, because you have great oversight into what's happening in a lot of different sectors, a lot of different industries, a lot of different types of organizations and what they're doing. How have you seen the stigma in the space of mental health support evolve over the recent years?
Well, I mean, I think Tim and Nathan have, you know, brought up two incredibly, you know, important points. I mean, I think, you know, we've seen a huge shift since the pandemic in terms of how people are thinking about mental health. And I think to Tim's point, you know, it's really helped people to understand that actually we all have mental health. This isn't just about mental illness. And then I think to Nathan's point around trauma, I think this has been, you know, in countries like India, where, you know, there has been extreme levels of trauma and impact as a result of COVID. We've seen businesses, you know, over there say, well, you know, actually we have to respond, we have to do something about the mental health crisis that we're now experiencing in our country. So I think the pandemic, COVID, has really shifted thinking. But what I would say is that in, you know, from global organisation perspectives, we've had organisations that are headquartered in places like the UK, Canada, Australia, where they're actually quite advanced in terms of workplace mental health. You know, so I think there is a different sort of understanding around when we're talking about mental health. Again, we're not just talking about people with a clinical diagnosis of a mental ill health condition. We're actually talking about all of us. We're actually talking about organisational performance. So, you know, to Tim, some of those stats, I mean, you know, they're staggering, the data that, you know, has been presented by Tim and the team at Deloitte. And actually, if 80% of your workforce, you know, and 46% of them are, you know, feeling burnt out, then there's a problem. And you as a business leader, if, you know, if you had an IT problem that you needed to fix or some other problem with your organization, you would invest the money to fix the issue. So I think there's a change in kind of particularly leadership, you know, around mental health in the workplace. So that's how we're starting to see businesses, you know, looking at these type of issues. In the UK, as I said, you know, we've been at this for some time. We've had really great campaigns such as Time to Change, you know, This Is Me, Green Ribbon, and we're starting to see that globally. So we've got, you know, campaigns, a leadership pledge such as the Global Business Collaboration on Workplace Mental Health. We've recently had the WHO guidelines on mental health in the workplace. So we're really starting to see shifts in how businesses are looking at this globally. And particularly those who've done a lot already in other countries are starting to see them evolve their programs now, so that they're looking to take what they've learned in certain countries and develop global approaches. Yeah, it's certainly a shift that we're seeing. And, you know, I just want to sort of suggest perhaps one of our guides for businesses that are starting to think about how, because that's the big challenge. I know we've got a lot to cover in this session, but I just wanted to point out our sort of global thriving work framework is a really good place for businesses to start if they're thinking about how they develop and evolve their programs.
It's a really practical framework, and knowing it well, I know that it will really help. So if you haven't taken a look at it, do download it from the chat and guide you. Absolutely. So I think there's something here about, you know, understanding the different progress that we're seeing in different parts of the world. How do we learn from different countries, but also take a more individualized approach? Tim, I know this has been something you've been thinking about in terms of not putting that Western view of mental health onto other countries. Would you be able to share a little bit about how you approach that?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think, you know, it's very tempting, you know, when you have successes in sort of more, we'd say more mature parts of the globe, particularly with a global organization like ours, you know, I think about US and UK, as Alison was saying, some of those campaigns were very successful. There's the temptation to go, oh great, well let's just do it here, let's take it somewhere else. But actually, like the local context, and I'm a big believer in terms of like co-designing, co-leading, giving that, really designing that together, because I learned that very quickly, in this role, this global role, that, for example, talking about using the term mental health in South America means something very different to what it does in China, to US, to UK. So, one of the biggest things that we've, learned is that, yes, we can have global approaches and global universal kind of principles, but you do need to take that to the local area and translate it and make sure it fits. Otherwise, I think the real risk here is that you can actually end up doing harm if you're not doing it properly. This thing does take planning, it takes execution, and it takes a real methodical way to make sure it works well. I think at worst we can do nothing, but we cannot do nothing, but at worst we can make it worse. We don't want that at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need to be so considered in our approaches to make sure that we're not doing harm. Absolutely. And whether that's really understanding that local culture, as you've given a great example of how you've done that through that really participative co-design, or whether that's in relation to a comment that Matt has shared with us in the chat, in terms of recognizing that no matter what country you're in, what demographic you're working with, for many leaders, it's still really hard to be vulnerable. And we know leaders telling their stories and being vulnerable helps remove the stigma, but actually recognizing that if leaders aren't ready for that and full vulnerability, we've got to take them on a journey and not throw them in that deep end, because that can do harm to them. So we're really considering, how can we do this that, as you say, Tim, moves us forward, but does no harm in the process, progress, rather than taking us backwards in that sense. And I think one tension that's going through my mind and that we grapple with a lot at Feel Good is, we work globally and we work with really diverse audiences. How do we balance this inclusive approach? Everything we're saying today about we all have mental health and this needs to be an inclusive conversation, but also recognizing our lived experiences aren't the same. And actually there is some groups who need different support, need more support. There's some of us who it's much easier to be open and vulnerable about our mental health than others for many complex socio-cultural reasons. And I think I'm keen to hear what you've done to sort of navigate this balance between inclusion and for everyone, but also really addressing the individual needs within this. Nathan, how do you approach this at the Body Shop?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to just also concur that a one-size-fits-all approach is now passé. We just cannot really be able to take a one-size-fits-all approach. And one of the things that I say a lot here, and have been starting to say more and more publicly, is that mental health is mental wealth, and we need to really rethink that, so that we're thinking positively about the health part. And if we reframe that's a way to do that. But I also agree with what Alison earlier said, is in parts of Asia where I live, mental health is a taboo, and we heard Tim talk about that too. We don't talk about mental health in Japan and Korea and China. You just don't. It's something that is such a sacred, not talked about, embarrassing, shame ridden, guilt ridden, losing your face kind of topic that we would never talk about it. But then you go to places like Australia and New Zealand, and it's far progressed, as it is, in many of the Western countries, with things like Are You Okay Day, and every day is an Are You Okay Day, and we're blowing things up every day around being able to talk about it. At the Body Shop, as an activist in this space, and I'm one of you all in the audience, I'm an HR practitioner. I've been an HR guy for 25 years. I moved into this space so that we could really start doing something about it. And as an HR person, we're always talking about engagement. We're talking about how do we help our people? How do we, help them move from languishing to thriving? And it's a hard movement, but there's engagement in all of that. And I think one of the ways that we've done that is just to start to blow up these taboo topics. And I'll give you a couple of good examples. If you enable me, I could talk all day about this. But the one really great thing that we did is we brought an intersectional approach to one of our programs last year, and it was talking about LGBTQ mental health in the workplace. It's an often common issue amongst LGBTQ people, but what other heteronormative people, consider or don't consider is that we're constantly having to wear the stripes. We're constantly having to come out. We're constantly having to tell those stories. And as an LGBTQ leader, what I thought would be really interesting is let's cross section here. So what we did was we created one of our programs around the Pride Month time, June, July of last year. We invited an all Asia LGBTQ panel to talk about their LGBTQ mental health challenges in working in Asia. So what we did was we blew up two taboos at once, because no one's talking about gay people in Asia either. And we're talking about mental health. So we had the opportunity to kind of bring a very diverse audience of people who were curious about one or the other, and really then kind of bring the human element of, we're all human in this. We all have, our mental health. We all have physical health and all the dimensions of well-being that we bring to the workplace. Let's talk about that. And I think finding the common denominator is a way to start to blow up those topics. I'll bring one more example, and I don't want to hog the time, but we talked about menopause, and I am talking about menopause a lot. And I would say people get really nervous when I start talking about menopause. But we should be talking about menopause and all of human reproductive health. But one of the ways that we started to really take a very practical approach was we knew we wanted to do something in this space. We know that there's a mental health issue connected with the symptoms of perimenopause and menopause. We know that 1 in 4 women or people assigned female at birth or with female sex characteristics leave the workplace because of symptoms around perimenopause and menopause. And there's absolutely then a whole brethren list of symptoms that accompany that. That's a hit on engagement. That's a hit on attrition and recruitment costs. And if we're not thinking about those things from and I know our CFOs are always saying, what's the ROI and how are we going to get the we need to be thinking about this. So we did a very extensive policy review. We didn't have a policy, so we created a menopause policy. But what we did was we surveyed our people before we did any education. We took an awareness and education approach, and we did a series of some beautiful lived experiences. Again, a panel, some experts, a doctor, and we brought these over a series of time. We created a community, because once we brought people together, people were like, oh my gosh, you feel that way too? Oh, you have that. So what I'm saying is we were able to accelerate the conversation, not only about mental health, but about, menopause. When we look at our population, it's a very relevant topic. But we also know that there's a feel-good factor with, connecting with young people on this topic too. So we just break down those taboo topics so we're able to then, help people live fully and healthily and informed. We surveyed everyone after all of this work, and we found that 85% of our employees were able to then lift and shift their knowledge about this topic. And when we announced then on World Menopause Day last year, we've just annualized that, we have a global policy now, 5 days of annual leave for people who are experiencing those symptoms. You can bring people through that door very easily. It's about how practical you want to be and how practical you need to think about it. I'd say one last thing to the HR folks out there, the big discussion that many of us are now talking is we need to be looking about how we design jobs, how we look at job work, how jobs include mental health and well-being. Those elements are super important as we start to look at the new normal, because people are going to be asking about it. And that's not just hybrid working or work from home. It's how does my job enable me to have this space where I can plug into resources or feel better or take care of my whole self. So again, I could talk a lot about this, but we've done a lot of different kinds of things. The last thing I would say is starting to blow up topics brought the men into the fold. The guys said, all right, we appreciate the conversation on menopause and on the gay stuff. How about let's talk about men's mental health? And we did a whole segment this year as a result of listening to our employees about what, the unique needs of men and dads who are in business, because they wear a different mantle of pressure and mental health. So one thing starts to lead to the next, and we can continue to to kind of activate our people in this way. But it just takes one small step from the HR person or the well-being person or that volunteer who's out there saying, what can I do? Turn that switch on and you'll be surprised at the magic that can happen.
Absolutely. I love that. Just so many powerful examples of activism in action there, really thinking about, what is the switch? What is the role that we can play? How do we build a community and engage everyone in this conversation? And it's great to hear that, taking the intersectionality approach has been an important part of actually opening up the conversation across communities as well. And it's been very inclusive in that. So I think that, there's so much great advice in there for people from, really thinking about your narrative and positioning mental health as mental wealth. Thinking about how are we engaging everyone? What are the things that matter most? And how do we build community and conversation and bring those real true stories out? Use the voices of different perspectives to actually think about what do we need to do differently. And then that whole piece around the systemic approach. What we're hearing as we have many more conversations around mental health at work is fundamentally the way we work in this modern age is not fit for purpose. It is not good for our health. And that's what the stories that are coming through organizations are showing all of us, and gives us the space strategically to think about how do we redesign work in a way that is good for the human being. And that's one of my biggest passions. So I'll not go any further on that because I'd love to bring Tim into this as well, because I know that you've done a lot about thinking about bringing in different voices, different perspectives at Deloitte. What's worked?
Yeah, definitely. Tough to follow Nate on that, actually. There's lots of good stuff in that. I completely concur. If I can try and offer something is, we're always very sort of hot on sort of what's the evidence behind the actions we take. Okay, and I would really encourage the audience to take a look, if they haven't already, at the Lancet Commission report on ending stigma and discrimination. Okay, a key point in that report says that people with lived experience are the key agents for change in stigma reduction, and they need to be strongly supported to lead and co-lead any intervention that you do. I just want to give a couple of examples in the ways that we've tried to do that here at Deloitte. Okay, so the first one is around normalizing the conversation. So how do you normalize those everyday conversations you have about mental health? You will see with my virtual backdrop, where am I pointing? That way. It's, we had this campaign recently globally about sort of asking what's really on your mind and saying, like, the world isn't perfect and you don't have to be. Speaking candidly, you can imagine in an organization like ours where we're sort of paid, I suppose, for solutions and answers, we're saying it's okay to, be vulnerable and actually speak your mind and recognize some of the issues that people might be having. So this campaign was really focusing on empowering people with lived experience, no matter what's the intersectionality is of that conversation with mental health. So how do you give permission to people to speak up? Normalize this conversation every day, and being that role model. So a key part of this campaign, and I'll come to talk a bit more on this later, is we have something called a global mental health baseline. This is an expectation across all of the countries we operate in, something that is embedded in business as a member firm standard. Okay, and the second element of that is a concerted focus on reducing stigma. It requires leaders, CEOs of our member firms across the globe to speak about mental health, to say it's okay. And, this campaign was sort of in part some of that material to help them do that, and really it was great to see sort of the uptake. I don't know if anyone would see some of this branding on LinkedIn, for example, but we had CEOs across the world putting out and sharing stories, which was amazing. The second one, which I want to throw in, which was I really enjoyed this campaign, and it was a hard work, but it was very much worthwhile. So it was this concept of nothing about us without us. Okay, so it's how do you share lived experience in a way that's sort of making sure that the people with experience have that control over the story. So essentially what we did is we were enabling people around the globe, our people, to share stories about mental health, about their mental health, and making sure they were comfortable to do so. So what I was really proud about is that we had member firms and continents across the globe all represented, from South America, China, Asia Pacific. It was amazing to see, and really that was built by essentially making sure that that was co-designed and co-produced with the people with experience. Okay, so they owned the process and how they wanted it shared. Was it a written blog? Was it an animation? Was it a story? And So you see in the chat there, I give some of those examples, about some of the stories. Okay. But yeah, it set off a chain reaction, so seeing some of the people in the US and UK speaking, then we had contributions from Africa, people, that sort of safety in numbers and people knowing it's okay to speak about their stories. And that one of the proudest moments I felt was that after the campaign, this is about sort of 9 months after, is the Asia Pacific practice put on a town hall on mental health. The CEO spoke about his experience of mental health. And then we had stories from colleagues in China, in Indonesia, sharing openly about their experience, really normalizing it. But the point I wanted people to take away is that it wasn't like global coming in. It wasn't me going, right, we're going to do this and this is how it will be done. This was about making sure that people had control over it and they could share their stories in their way they felt most appropriate and best. That lived experience as the key agents, I think, is a critical part of how we solve this, honestly.
Absolutely. And I think there's been a really interesting question come in just slightly earlier that you've spoken to in your answer there, Tim. And that was, how do you create safety? What are the guidelines for safety when sharing lived experiences in the workplace? What needs to happen so that employees are not publicly sharing their experiences of mental health in an environment that isn't ready to support them, or worse, sharing with people who respond with stigmatizing beliefs and discrimination? And I think what you were talking about there, Tim, first of all, give people control over their story. So think about, what are they comfortable sharing? How do they want to share it? And make sure you're co-designing, co-producing it with them so that it's never going beyond what they feel ready for and what they feel comfortable for. You also talked as well about the principle of safety in numbers. So, really not thinking about putting one person out there, but actually how do we as a collective, tapping into that collective identity, start to share it together in that sense? And you talked as well a bit about using CEOs and using people who tend to have a bit more safety in an organization because of their seniority as being part of that too. Absolutely. Nate, is there anything you would add about, making sure, because you talked a lot about sharing stories as well, making sure people are safe in doing this?
Yeah, I just was saying that part of the way that we've done it is to really broker the conversation with a panel and the people who have volunteered to be on that panel, and to ensure that you do if you're going to do a panel discussion or a live discussion, or in a bigger audience, is to really pre-plan that in advance. Make sure that you're clear on what the questions are and do the preparation. I think I want to piggyback on Tim's comment about CEOs and senior leaders. One of the successful things that we were able to do at the Body Shop when we introduced a management training program for well-being, it was called How to Have the Well-Being Conversation. We actually got each one of our executive leaders to be co-sponsors, one for every one of the sessions that we had. So I think we had 12 or 14 different sessions, and each one of our executives was a co-sponsor that then sat with me beforehand, and then we brokered the training and they shared some of their stories. So it was a smaller audience. It broke it down in pieces so that you could have a little bit more accessibility. You could have a little bit more connection. So I think the idea is breaking it down in smaller chunks makes things a little bit more, because and I say chunks that still have safety in numbers, to Tim's point, but trying to go out to your worldwide audience with 12,000 employees, that's intimidating for people also. But if you break it down in smaller bits or regional bits or market bits, that becomes a little bit more appetizing for not only the audience, but also, inviting panelists and guests.
Yeah. Make it intimate, really make sure that people can have that really meaningful conversation, but it feels safer. Use those co-sponsors, build it into panel as well. I think really practical tools and techniques of what's worked for you. This whole conversation is raising questions for me about the role of the organization. I've had clients say to me recently, particularly in the Asia region, actually it's safer for me to start to share these things at work than outside of work. The global nature of our business means we're talking about this more than my local community is. And this is where I'm getting my support. This is where I'm able to access resources because of these more open conversations we're having. So I definitely see the evolution of the role of the workplace in busting the stigma, breaking those taboos, as you say, Nick, but also in terms of really moving us forward as a society. And then the other role that's really standing out in this conversation is the role of leaders. And we hear this so much at Feel Good. What is our leaders' role here? How do we keep them safe, but use them to be cultural carriers who influence and drive change and actually break some of this stigma? So Alison, I'd love to know your thoughts on this. What do you see as the role of leaders in all of this?
Oh, absolutely. And I think you make a really important point there, Jill, that actually the workplace, we are experiencing this global mental health crisis. We're experiencing it before the pandemic. It's even worse now. And I think part of the challenge is that the infrastructure that sits around us, both in the UK and in other countries across the world, is that there is not the support out there for the scale of the problem. So there is a real opportunity, I think, on the workplace, providing that place of safety for people to be able to talk openly about their mental health, and like you say, most importantly, access the support that they need. And this is something that we've come out in our research. We did a piece of research back in 2020 around race and mental health. And we know that there are, a number of, different communities where, stigma is particularly high. What we saw in that research, actually really encouragingly, is that many people felt safe, across all ethnicities, to speak openly in the workplace about their mental health and access the support they need. But to get to that point where people feel safe to open up, I think there's a really important role of leaders here. And one of the things that, the kind of conversations that I'm starting to have with our member organisations is about, how do we get leaders to feel able to open up? And I think we've talked about being human, and mental health is just part of being human. And being human is about being vulnerable. But in terms of leadership development, we don't tell leaders it's okay to be vulnerable. And I think that's part of, how we're seeing these really progressive organisations looking at this is very much part and parcel of, the leadership role in being authentic, in being vulnerable, in talking about these issues. This isn't just for those small few who are actually naturally just very good at doing this. It's very much part and parcel of leadership expectation. And for example, in our assessments, we'll look at organisations and how they're educating leaders, how they're giving them the tools, the guides, the resources, how they're, encouraging and setting that expectation. But more importantly now, it's about more leadership accountability. How are you supporting the development of your teams? How is your organisation building this into your systems so it's integrated into competency frameworks? It's, measured in performance reviews. And ultimately, organisations are valuing this so much that they're putting, they're linking this to compensation. So, there is a human element of being, a good leader and looking after your team. But I think if organisations really want to take this seriously, they really have to put value and weight behind it in terms of its importance and the prioritisation of that in the organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about, as you say, really clear expectations. This isn't an add-on. This isn't a nice to have. This is actually what leadership is. Leadership is a human act, and really creating an environment to look after the health, the performance, productivity of your people is what it's about. So I completely agree with you. Clear expectations, but then also, how do we bake this in and embed it into everything that we already have in terms of how we measure culture, how we hold leaders to account, performance appraisals, 360 feedback, use those existing mechanisms to support leaders with their development, with their growth, with holding them to account, for this, some of the most important acts that they can take as leaders at the moment. Absolutely. And I think Alison touched upon it a little bit there about, organizations as an access point. Nate, what have you done at the Body Shop to sort of really think about the organization's role and make sure the organization is supporting leaders?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because, I think it's evolving and it's fluid as we continue to learn. And that's one of the things as purposeful entrepreneurs at the Body Shop, we continue to try to learn from the things that we're doing. I think, we have the traditional EAP resources, which are very reactive, but we also built a community of well-being ambassadors. Throughout the last 2 years, we have about 100 ambassadors globally around the world who help bring programming, who bring the global programming local, who are doing their own kinds of programming and really keeping the 3 pillars of our practices of well-being alive and ready in all the places that we do business. We also took an approach with our mental health first aiders and certified. We have about 100 certified mental health first aiders around the world who are also really on hand and on standby to connect with people that they might know or people who know them, to connect when there's maybe a little bit more of an itchy moment or a sticky situation that someone maybe need help, to then refer to, and signpost to additional resources. So we've tried to also, build a grassroots approach from the bottom up, and then our leaders being involved. We need to do more in that space, honestly, because we're distracted by the other things that are happening in the world with the war happening and the challenges with inflation and the recession and running a business. But our leaders are also engaged in ensuring that we're having the conversation. So it really is a compression that we try to do in a positive way, so that there is an ecosphere of tools and resources for our people.
Yeah, I love that sort of thinking about the ecosphere. That's a term I'm going to steal and use again. Yeah, is that what we're doing with our strategy around mental health and well-being, making sure that we have thought of it from a holistic angle? And, as we're sort of talking, we're talking a lot about, really, how are we as an organization holding ourselves to account on this? Are we making that into our strategy? And I know there's some comments in the chat around this as well, thinking about, making sure that we're thinking about that proactively. And I know you've done a lot at Deloitte, Tim, in terms of thinking about the blueprint and how people are held to account, both leaders and member firms. Can you share with us a little bit about the work you've done there?
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, I'm a big believer that the work we do mustn't just sit in HR and talent alone. It needs to be sort of business led. Obviously, every organisation on this call will have different contexts. Again, it's like a broken record on that point, but it's important, I think. So for us at Deloitte, we have something called member firm standards. Okay, to be part of Deloitte, you must meet these standards, and part of one of those is about we have a mental health baseline. So that's an expectation on every single one of those countries and member firms to meet at this certain standard, this foundation. So creating that consistency globally. And so just really quickly on those, so there's 4 elements to it. First one is leadership, education, awareness. So I can tell you that all of our boards, executives, partners and directors have been through a session that talks about the importance of good mental health and why it's important for business and for people. And I'm not talking about sort of making sure that they've got access to an EAP. I'm talking about why, this is good for society in a much broader conversation. Secondly is about concerted focus on reducing stigma. I saw in the comments that Matt Wilson was talking a bit about the momentum, making sure you could keep that. And there's a really big part of this second element. We had CEOs, leaders regularly talking about this, making sure it's okay to talk about it, but it wasn't just on World Mental Health Day, it was throughout the whole year. Third one, information support. Everyone in Deloitte will have access to the right support, the right information. That is a basic standard that we've expected and we've made sure is universal. And the last one is probably a bit more of a sneaky one, this one in terms of an element, but we've talked about addressing the causes and contributors to poor mental health. So using a data-led approach to look at the what is happening in the business that might contribute to it. So, that was a big thing for us. I can tell you finally, it took a lot of work over the last 2 years, but we know that every single country now has sort of met this standard, and we're bringing the sort of final few details in now. And measuring it. So you heard me talk earlier in the millennial survey about that comfort of talking to your leader about mental health. So we have 2 key metrics which we look at in our global talent experience survey. So this is 500,000 people sort of filling in the survey essentially. First question is, I feel comfortable talking to my leader about mental health. And second is about if I were to experience poor mental health, I'm confident Deloitte would support me. So those are metrics we're tracking, and I'm really relieved and pleased to see that those have upticked this year as a result of this work. So, we haven't stopped. We need to keep going. But actually, this is not just an HR thing. We've really embedded this into the entire business as a standard to be part of Deloitte.
Absolutely. I think thank you for sharing that, Tim, because I think that gives a lot of people on this call guidance about, how do we bake this into our business strategy? We have a lot of people who have been speaking to us that feel good about, this is very important for our ESG agenda. What does that look like so we get leaders to take accountability? And I think the categories you have in the blueprint and how you're measuring that is a really strategic way of doing it for organizations. So thank you for sharing that so openly. We've got more questions coming in that I want to get to, but before we just do that, I'd be keen to just do a 1-minute wonder with a question. And thinking about everything that's been working so well and thinking specifically about the mental health landscape for 2023, what's the biggest priority for you and your organization next year based on all the success you've had? Alison, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for us, I think we're still in reactive mode. There's still so many, and people are calling them perma-crisis, poly-crisis as we go from one into the next. So I think there's a lot that organisations that work with us are still doing to respond to the crisis that we are facing. And, this has been mentioned, but obviously financial wellbeing is certainly a theme that many of our member organisations, are thinking about. one of the things that we're very passionate about, amongst others, is ways of working. Burnout has been mentioned today on the call. I think there's been a huge amount of work done around raising awareness, challenging stigma, but what we really want to see organisations do now is really look at ways of working, how that's impacting potentially on individual health, and what we can start to do to try and alleviate some of those challenges. Tim just mentioned actually data. We're certainly seeing a lot of organisations now building an evidence base, really looking at how they can utilise measurement and data to help inform them in terms of what the challenges are, but also what the most appropriate interventions and actions that need to be taken. So that's a very quick whistle stop of what we're looking at, but there's lots of things that organisations are focusing on. I wish we had another hour to talk it through.
I know, exactly, absolutely. So sort of really thinking about moving from that reactive to proactive. How do we change ways of working to reduce burnout is something that I think all organisations could really take some inspiration from. Absolutely. Nathan, for you, one thing that...
Yeah, I agree with Alison. I think we're in the place where we're still having to be reactive, but I think looking at root cause, as Tim was kind of getting at, is we start to address root cause and get proactive about that, then and we can answer the questions on the mental health first aiders, but that's still slightly reactive. But if we're looking and moving upstream in how we, are addressing workloading, and again, if we're looking at job descriptions and how we create well-being in job and workload, that's a way to address it upstream before people get too far down. I say that's ambitious. That's kind of the big project down the road. But I think practically for us, it's been and will continue to be building a culture of well-being. It's not anything that is a tick box anymore. It's essential. It's not optional. And it's about not only the symbols and the rituals and the language, but it's about building habits and building muscle and building the ability to do what we say we were going to do, and bringing that to life through think tanks and activities. And bringing, gatherings of our mental health first aiders and our well-being, bringing the collective together to really try to solve the upstream together, so that as we continue to move through that momentum of the interim normal to new normal, and we're more prepared and we're more in the conversation. That's what it will be for us. But at a fundamental frontline, point of view, it's going to be about mindfulness, connection, and gratitude, which is our three pillars, and creating that culture, reinforcing that culture.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I think, this address it upstream, be more proactive, think about the ways of working. There's one of the questions here around, what sort of actions are we talking about here? This is about thinking about, actually how is workload distributed across the organization, across teams, doing reviews of that and thinking, how do we optimize that? It might be about optimizing information flow and how we communicate. It might be thinking about what are our processes for collaboration, for decision making. It's actually thinking about the things we spend all our time doing that maybe we've overcomplicated over the years. And there's a way to really think about how do we streamline this to get back to what matters most and to enable people to be fully empowered to work with as much ease as possible. So we won't have time, Samuel, to go into lots of examples of that, but do reach out to me separately, because I can give you lots of examples about really what a proactive strategy could look like in more detail. But Tim, what's your focus for 2023?
Yeah, it's much the same. We're taking, after sort of establishing this foundation, the baseline, we're moving to much more proactive pieces, so trying to bring that baseline up. One aspect which I think is, really excited about is we're introducing this concept of good work. What does good work look like? And I'll drop in the chat a link to some of the framework that we're looking at and consider at the moment. But we want to make that really easy for leaders to apply. In our context, we've got lots of a team established all the time, up, being rolled out for clients and projects. And, so making it really easy for leaders to sort of appreciate the work of their people and say, like, have I got this design right? What do I need to tweak to make not just about preventing mental ill health, but actually about creating work that help people thrive, to get the most, to unlock their potential, so really we've got a few elements in there that we'll be focusing on. But let me drop a link in the chat for Samuel and the team here.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to have a coffee with me or anyone else, just at the team at Feel Good, to talk about what good work is, how we create meaningful, health-giving work, we're always more than happy just to share our thinking and our understanding as psychologists on that. So that's great. We've got just a couple of minutes left, and there's been a bit of a flurry of interest in the topic of mental health first aiders. How do you promote them? How do you really make sure they are utilised well? Nate, what have you done at the Body Shop?
Yeah, one of the things that we did was in the certification process, we built a community. And again, it's shared experiences, people who are interested, volunteers. But what we didn't do as much of it this year. We did a lot last year, but we bring the mental health first aiders together for a couple of times throughout the year just to check in with each other, make sure we're sharing stories, that we're sharing experiences in confidence, of course, and protecting the people that, you know, we may have interacted with. But we also do, with our wellbeing ambassadors, we have think tanks. We say, here's the current problem. You all are facing, you know, some of this, and you're meeting people, or we're not meeting people. You know, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? Let's have a collective think on what can we do to improve or to solve. And we use the collective beehive brain power behind the group of people who want to activate and who want to make a difference. We've seen the engagement go up in this space, but that's a little bit about how we promote it. And it's not easy. It's not easy to pull 100 people around the world together. And you know, when you're in a global role like this, you know, you end up doing calls at 10 o'clock at 11 o'clock at night, because that's what activism is about. So it's about finding the people who want to do it, and then really engaging them to be really great at it, and to connect on it, and to share it back so that there's an action. At least that's been working for us. We need to do more. We haven't aced this at all. We're still learning.
Fantastic. So sort of really build that community, but use that community as well. Use the bright minds, that hive mind that's in there. And there's lots of great examples from others in the community in the chat as well. Alison, if you had one thing to add to that, is there anything you've seen across your community that you thought, oh, someone's doing this really well for mental health first aiders?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the word community, actually, and I know I've seen, you know, mental health first aid is great, but actually there's been a lot of emphasis around peer support and allies networks and mental health allies. So learning, you know, from what we've seen in other inclusion networks in the past. So I think bringing together a large group of people who are there to support each other. And I always would advocate for training for everybody so that we're all equipped to have that really good supportive conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. So I think there's been so much wisdom shared today, and we've talked so much about, you know, what can we do by building this community, creating that education, opening up the conversation around lived experiences, taking an approach that is looking at intersectionality and making sure the conversation is fully inclusive, through to using data, having ways to hold people to account, really think about baking this into your strategy as well. And then we've lightly touched upon, how do we actually address this proactively and in a really systemic way, which I know is a conversation I'd love to have in more detail. Thank you all so much, my panelists. You've been absolutely fantastic. I've learned so much from all of you, and I hope the community has as well. Thank you everyone for the chat too, and for the questions. There's a few questions we didn't get to, that we will try and follow up in terms of everything we send out afterwards in addressing those. And likewise, as Leanne mentioned, there will be a report diving into stigma in more detail that will be in your inboxes shortly. And look out for the new Feel Good podcast, which will be launching in December, and we'll be tackling the topic of overcoming stigma in organizations on that as well. Thank you so much, and I wish everyone a great rest of the day, and I look forward to seeing you at our next event. And thank you so much, panelists. It was great to talk to you today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Be
See
well.
you again soon. Thanks. Bye.